In the dry plains of Arizona, where the wind carried dust and secrets, a young woman named Clara lived under the shadow of her family's shame. Her father, a stern man with more pride than kindness, had lost most of their land in a dispute with a neighboring ranch. To settle the matter, the town elders decided she must marry a cowboy named Jack Colton, a man known for his silence and his strength. It was not a marriage of choice, but one of punishment. Clara's father believed it would humble her spirit and teach her obedience. But fate had its own plans. On the morning of the wedding, Clara stood in a simple white dress, her hands trembling. She had never met Jack before. Rumors said he was a widower, a man who had once fought in frontier skirmishes and now lived alone with his horses. The people whispered that he spoke more to his animals than to humans. Clara's heart beat hard as she was taken by wagon toward the ranch that would now be her home. Every mile took her farther from the world she knew and deeper into one ruled by dust, silence, and the strange law of men who worked the land. When she arrived, she saw him standing near the corral, tall, broad-shouldered, his shirt rolled at the sleeves, and his eyes the color of storm clouds. He didn't smile, but his gaze was calm and steady, the kind that seemed to see everything at once. Clara's first instinct was fear, but something else flickered under it, curiosity. Jack took off his hat slowly and nodded, his voice deep and quiet. "Welcome to my land, ma'am," he said, and those few words made her heart pause. There was no harshness in them, only a kind of respect she hadn't expected. The first days were silent between them. Clara helped in the kitchen, learning to cook on a wood stove, while Jack worked from sunrise to dusk, mending fences and tending cattle. At night she heard him whistling softly outside as he brushed down his horse. Sometimes she would peek from the window, and in the moonlight she could see how gentle his hands were with the animal. It made her wonder if the same hands could ever be gentle with her. The house itself told her much about him. It was clean but simple, built of strong wood and stone. On the mantel sat a small framed picture, an older woman with kind eyes. When she asked, Jack said quietly, "My ma." There were no other photos, no sign of a wife or children. Clara sensed a deep loneliness in him, like the land itself, quiet, endless, and waiting for something to grow again. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast over the plains. Jack ran to bring the horses inside, while Clara stood at the doorway watching lightning strike across the hills. When he came back, drenched from rain, she hurried forward without thinking and handed him a towel. Their hands touched. For a moment, neither moved. Water dripped from his hair, and she noticed a faint scar along his jaw. He caught her looking and smiled, a small, shy thing that changed his whole face. Her heart fluttered wildly. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and something inside her began to melt. That night, as thunder rolled, she found herself restless. She walked into the kitchen and found him sitting by the fire, his hat on the table, reading a worn-out book. He looked up as she entered. "Can't sleep either?" he asked softly. She shook her head and sat across from him. The fire crackled between them. "You don't talk much," she said after a while. "Talkin' never fixed much," he answered. "But listening sometimes does." His words stayed with her long after she went back to her room. Over the next weeks, their silence turned to small conversations about the land, the weather, and the animals. Jack began teaching her how to ride a horse, though she had never been near one before. The first time she tried, she was terrified, gripping the saddle too tight. He placed his hands over hers, steadying her. "Don't fight the horse," he said softly. "Let it feel your calm." His touch was gentle, guiding. She looked at him then, really looked, and something stirred deep in her chest, a feeling she had never known before. It wasn't fear or duty. It was warmth. Every day after that, she found herself waiting for the sound of his boots on the porch. She started cooking meals he liked, fixing small things in the house, and planting wildflowers near the fence. When he noticed, he simply nodded and said, "Looks better already." It wasn't much, but from him it felt like a treasure. The townsfolk were surprised when they visited months later. They had expected misery, maybe even tears, but instead they found laughter. Clara had changed the lonely ranch into a home. Jack, who once spoke to no one, now shared quiet smiles and simple words that carried meaning. When someone teased that she had tamed the cowboy, he only replied, "No, ma'am, she just taught me to see again." One evening, as the sun dipped low, they rode out together to check the fences. The air was golden, the kind that makes the world look softer. Clara watched Jack work, the way he handled every post with patience. When he caught her staring, she blushed. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "I used to think this marriage was my punishment." He looked at her, puzzled. "And now?" She smiled, her voice trembling. "Now I think it was my second chance." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he reached out and took her hand. "Guess we both got one then," he said quietly. After that day, the bond between them grew stronger. They worked side by side, shared stories, and sometimes just sat in silence under the stars. Jack showed her how to track the trails of wild horses, and she taught him to cook her mother's favorite stew. They began to understand each other without needing many words. When she fell sick one evening with a high fever, he stayed by her bed all night, changing the wet cloth on her forehead, whispering soft words she barely heard. When she finally woke up, weak but smiling, she saw him sleeping beside her chair, his head bowed in exhaustion. Tears filled her eyes, and she realized she had fallen deeply in love with the man she once feared. When she recovered, she decided to tell him how she felt. But Jack, shy as ever, spoke first. One morning he handed her a small box made of carved wood. Inside was a simple silver ring. "You didn't choose this life, Clara," he said, his voice low, "but I'd be proud if you chose me." Her hands trembled as she looked at him. "I already did," she whispered, "the day you smiled at me in the rain." From that day they were no longer two strangers bound by duty, but two souls who had found peace in each other. The townsfolk who once pitied her now said she had found what most never did, love born not of chance but of patience. And though life on the ranch was still hard, she never once wished for her old world back. The sound of Jack's boots, the warmth of his quiet laughter, and the endless sky above them were enough. Sometimes, at sunset, Clara would walk out to the fence line, her dress fluttering in the wind, and Jack would come up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her shoulders. "You still think this was punishment?" he'd ask with a teasing grin. She would shake her head, smiling softly. "No," she'd say, leaning into him. It was the best mistake they ever made. And as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in golden fire, she'd know that destiny, in its strange way, had led her exactly where she was meant to be, not in a mansion or a town, but in the quiet heart of the Wild West beside the man she loved. The months passed, and the once lonely ranch began to bloom with new life. Clara and Jack worked side by side every day, their rhythm smooth and steady like the flowing wind across the plains. She learned to read the signs of weather, to tell when a storm was coming just by the smell in the air, and he learned to laugh again. The walls that once echoed with silence were now filled with the sounds of soft laughter, the crackle of fire, and the gentle hum of a woman's song. For the first time in years, Jack felt like the world had given him back something he thought he'd lost forever: hope. One early morning, Clara woke to find Jack already outside, saddling his horse. He looked worried. "Cattle broke the fence last night," he said. "They might have gone toward the creek." She offered to come along, and though he hesitated, he finally nodded. The air was cold and mist rolled low over the grass as they rode together. Clara had grown confident with horses now. She sat tall in the saddle beside him. After hours of searching, they found several cows caught in thick mud near the edge of the creek. Jack jumped down and began pulling them free, his boots sinking deep in the wet ground. Clara climbed down too, helping without a word. Her hands got dirty, her dress soaked, but she didn't care. Jack glanced at her and smiled softly. "You're tougher than most men I know," he said. She laughed, brushing mud from her face. "I had a good teacher." By the time they returned, the sun had set and both were covered in dust and sweat. They shared dinner by lamplight, and Clara leaned against his shoulder. "You know," she said quietly, "I think I was meant for this life." Jack looked down at her, his expression gentle. "I think this life was waiting for you." Those words stayed with her through every hardship that followed. That spring, the land faced one of the worst droughts in years. The grass dried up and the water holes turned shallow. Many ranchers lost their herds, and some packed up and left town. Jack refused to give up. Day after day, he rode far to find patches of grass or hidden springs. Clara watched him grow thinner from the long rides, his hands blistered from the ropes. She did what she could, boiling water from the well, mending harnesses, keeping the house warm and full of light. When he came home late at night, she was always waiting, a lantern in her hand. "You're home," she'd say softly. and the sight of her face was enough to ease every burden he carried. One evening, a small group of ranchers gathered at their home to talk about helping each other. The men argued about selling cattle or sharing supplies. Jack listened quietly, then spoke in his calm voice. "We survive together or not at all," he said. His words struck something in their hearts. Clara sat by his side, proud of how he had become a leader in a town that once called him strange. That night after everyone left, she said, "You've changed, Jack. You're not the lonely man I met." He smiled faintly. "And you're not the frightened girl I married." She reached across the table and held his hand. "Maybe we saved each other," she whispered. As summer came, a small miracle happened. One of the cows gave birth to a healthy calf, the first in weeks. Clara cried with joy as she knelt beside it, stroking its soft head. "Look at him, Jack," she said, smiling through tears. "He's proof we're doing something right." Jack crouched beside her, his eyes warm. "He's proof that even dry land can bloom again," he said. It felt like life itself was slowly returning. Their bond grew deeper, built not on words but shared moments. When Clara fell ill that autumn from exhaustion, Jack stayed by her side, refusing to leave the room. He cooked her meals, read to her from old books, and even learned how to make herbal tea the way her mother once did. "You don't have to fuss," she told him weakly one night. "I'd do worse for a horse," he teased, but his eyes shone with worry. When she smiled, he touched her hand gently. "You mean more to me than this whole land," he said quietly. "Don't you ever forget that." When she recovered, they celebrated with a small gathering of neighbors. Clara baked pies, and Jack built a fire outside where everyone sang old songs. For the first time, the ranch wasn't just their home. It was the heart of the community. People came to them for advice, shelter, and kindness. The girl once forced into marriage had become a symbol of hope. One morning in early winter, a letter arrived from the town council. They wanted Jack to serve as a representative for their district. He had never sought any role beyond his fence line, but Clara encouraged him. "You've earned their trust," she said. "They see what I saw long ago." He hesitated. "I'm just a cowboy, Clara." She smiled softly. "You're more than that. You're the kind of man others look up to." The day he left for town, she packed him lunch and stood on the porch as he rode away. The wind was sharp and cold, but her heart was warm. Watching him disappear over the hill, she realized how proud she was. Of him, of them, of everything they had built together. When he returned days later, he brought with him not money or power, but gratitude. "They listened," he told her simply. "They said I spoke plain and honest." She hugged him tight. "That's all you ever needed to be." As years went by, their love matured like fine wood, stronger, smoother, and deeper. They planted trees near the creek, and when they bloomed, Clara called them her hope trees. Every spring, their white flowers reminded her of their beginning, the forced wedding, the fear, and the way it all turned into something beautiful. Jack sometimes caught her staring at the blossoms and would smile. "Still thinking about the past?" he'd ask. She'd nod. "Sometimes. But mostly I just thank God for it." Their quiet joy continued until one fateful summer when a wildfire broke out miles away. The sky turned red and smoke filled the air. Jack gathered the horses and Clara packed food and blankets. The fire drew closer with every gust of wind. When the flames came within sight of their fence, Jack turned to her and said, "We might have to leave." But Clara looked around at the home they had built, the pictures on the wall, the smell of the wood they had cut together. "We'll fight it," she said firmly. "We won't lose this." Side by side, they worked through the night, carrying water, digging trenches, keeping the flames away from the house. Neighbors came to help, remembering how Jack and Clara had once stood for them. By dawn, the fire had stopped at the edge of their land. The fields were blackened, but the house still stood. When the danger passed, Clara sank to her knees, exhausted, and Jack knelt beside her. He wiped soot from her cheek and whispered, "You were never the weak one, Clara. I was." She shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, Jack, we were strong together." In the months that followed, they rebuilt what was lost. New grass grew over the burned ground, and young calves filled the fields again. Every evening, as the sun set behind the hills, they sat on the porch together, hands entwined. The world around them was still rough and uncertain, but their love was steady, unbreakable like the land itself. Years later, when travelers passed through and asked about the couple who ran the Colton Ranch, the locals would smile and say, "They were proof that even the hardest beginnings can turn to gold." For those who saw them, an old cowboy with a gentle voice and a woman whose eyes still held the spark of her youth, it was clear that love, once born in unlikely soil, had grown into something timeless. And sometimes, when the wind blew softly over the plains, Clara could almost hear the echo of her own laughter from years ago. The day she first saw him smile in the rain, it reminded her that what began as punishment had turned into a gift, a life full of warmth, courage, and love that would never fade.